Optimizing Arma Reforger comes down to two key things: system level optimizations and in-game graphic settings. In this video, we'll cover both. First, we'll go over important updates and settings outside the game that can impact performance. Then we'll dive into Arma Reforger's graphic settings, breaking down how each one affects visuals and FPS. At the end, I'll share my personal recommended settings that strike the best balance between visual quality and smooth performance. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to start with the system level optimizations. These can have a big impact on performance even before you touch the in-game settings. First up, update your BIOS. This helps ensure your CPU and motherboard are working together as efficiently as possible, especially on newer platforms and processors. Head to your motherboard manufacturer's website, look up your model, and follow their steps carefully. If you're not sure how to do this, check out my quick 1-minute BIOS update guide linked in the top right corner. The process is nearly identical across all major brands. Next, make sure Windows is fully updated. Go to Windows Update and install any pending updates if you have them. While you're there, enable game mode and settings and hardware accelerated graphics. This helps prioritize resources for gaming workloads. Next, update your chipset drivers. Both Intel and AMD have automated tools that can help you with this process. Links for these tools are in the video description below. Finally, update your GPU drivers. The latest graphics drivers often include performance improvements and fixes for newer games. If you're experiencing crashes or stutters, especially after changing or upgrading your GPU, consider doing a clean install of your drivers using Display Driver Uninstaller, aka DDU. Normal uninstall methods often leave leftover files, which can cause conflicts. If you've never used DDU before, I've got a short video guide for that as well, linked here on screen and in the description below. In terms of the GPU software settings, there isn't much that's going to change the performance. Basically, with an Nvidia GPU, I'd recommend going to the Nvidia app and changing the power management mode to prefer maximum performance. This helps prevent the GPU from downclocking during gameplay. The other thing I do is change the digital vibrance and gamma here, just because I like saturated colors and a little more gamma in my picture. If you're on a 50 series card, you can also use smooth motion if you want to try out frame generation. If you're on an AMD card, you can use the automatic GPU tuning to squeeze out a little more performance from your GPU with an automatic undervolt or overclock. Results will vary depending on your specific GPU and overall setup. There aren't many performance altering options beyond that, but you can adjust color settings here if you want to calibrate visuals to your liking. Also, if you want to try AMD's fluid motion frames, this is AMD's frame generation. This is where you can enable it. I've also got a full adrenaline guide here if you want to dive deeper into the adrenaline control panel. This next section is quick but important. Make sure your monitor is set to its maximum refresh rate in Windows display settings. Sometimes after a driver update, it can default back to 60 Hz even on high refresh rate monitors, so it's always worth double checking. As for syncing features like G-Sync, FreeSync, Enhanced Sync, I personally leave all of them off, both in my monitor settings and in-game. I also keep VSync off. I prefer to see raw, uncapped performance, especially in a game like Arma Reforger where responsiveness matters. In my experience, sync features have been more helpful when I'm dealing with lower frame rates to smooth out gameplay, but on higher end systems, I just feel like they add more input delay than anything. That said, it really comes down to personal preference. If you're not sure where to start with these settings, just try my approach first and adjust from there based on how the game feels to you. Before we jump into the individual settings, I've broken down everything into two main categories: performance impact and visual impact. Then I gave each setting a score and created some simple charts to help you quickly see which ones are worth adjusting based on whether you care more about getting the max FPS or the best visuals. Now personally, I always want to get as close to possible to max frame rates, but I also care a ton about how the game looks. I'm not trying to play something that feels smooth but looks like Roblox. So here's what I did. I set up a benchmark route on Camp Blake, then tested the game at maximum settings to see the visual ceiling and again at lowest settings to see the performance ceiling. After that, I focused on the highest impact visual settings, tuning them up as much as possible without taking too big of an FPS hit. From there, I went through every other setting and weighed its performance cost against the visual benefit to find the best balance for myself. So after I dive into each setting one by one in the following section, I'll share my personal optimized presets at the end and show you how it stacks up visually and performance wise against both max settings and lowest settings. For render skill, I'm testing everything at native resolution for this video. I won't be testing FSR here, but if you're looking to boost performance, FSR can help at the cost of some visual clarity. So if after you've tweaked all your settings visually and you've got it where you want, but your FPS maybe isn't where you want it to be, you can go ahead and lower the render scale here and turn on FSR. That will turn on upscaling, where it will improve your performance at a small visual hit. This game is pretty far behind in the upscaling game. It's only using FSR 1.0. For VSync, I leave this off. Just like I mentioned earlier, it can help with screen tearing. but I prefer raw responsiveness. For FPS limit, I leave this disabled, but if you want to cap your frame rate, maybe to reduce heat or power usage, you can do that here. Draw distance, I tested this both on max and min, and surprisingly saw no real difference in performance. For now, I'm leaving this on max since it doesn't seem to hurt FPS too much. For nearby depth of field, I haven't noticed any visual or performance difference with this one. You can leave it on or off based on preference. For depth of field quality, I'll leave this on simple. The bokeh option might add a bit more blur and cinematic depth, but honestly, I couldn't tell much of a difference during gameplay. Use 2D scopes. If you're on a lower end system or struggling with performance when you're scoped in, definitely turn this on. It replaces the full overlay scope effect with a simpler 2D image, which avoids double rendering the scene. So when you scope in, all you see is your scoped in image. You don't see the background. The default 3D scopes can cause a significant FPS drop because it's basically double rendering the image. So this is one of the few settings that can give you a real boost if you're having issues scoped in. Competitively, it's a small disadvantage, so you have to weigh that against if it's worth the FPS boost. Alright, for post-process anti-aliasing, you can choose between off, SMAA low or high, or FXAA low or high. Personally, I found it very difficult to notice a major visual difference between them. If I look closely and kind of scroll through all the images, then I can kind of tell, but it's very difficult. In this test scene, the FPS difference was about 2% between the high settings and off. Since the impact is minor and SMAA high technically offers the cleanest edges overall, I'm leaving it on SMAA high. For horizon-based ambient occlusion, this setting darkens areas where objects meet to create more realistic shadowing and depth. It can impact performance by up to 15%. I leave it on low since visually it doesn't add much for me, and that's a solid trade-off for the FPS gain. SSR or screen space reflections. This simulates reflections from surfaces based on what's visible on screen. It makes reflections more dynamic. Performance impact is about 8%, and I don't find the visuals significantly better. I leave this on low. Contact shadows, this can have about a 7% FPS impact, but a huge visual improvement. It enhances shadow detail where objects meet the ground or other surfaces, and it gives the whole world more depth and realism. This one's worth keeping on, even at its FPS hit of about 7%. Hardware anti-aliasing, this setting smooths out jagged edges, and going from off to 8x can reduce FPS by up to 43%. While 8x looks slightly sharper on close inspection, I honestly couldn't justify the performance hit. It just doesn't feel like a big enough visual upgrade in motion, so I leave this off. I don't feel I'm losing that much visually. It does look different, but I wouldn't call it worse really. For model geometric detail, this controls the detail level on models. I saw about a 15% difference in performance from low to ultra, but it does noticeably improve overall texture and shape detail. I found the visual increase to be worth it to keep this setting on high. Object draw distance, this is self-explanatory. It controls how far out objects are rendered. I measured about a 15% difference from low to high here. It really depends on the map and your playstyle, but I personally leave this on medium as a solid balance. Terrain surface detail, going from none to parallax plus high quality shadows, costs about 5% FPS. This improvement depends on the terrain you're playing on. I leave it on parallax for a bit of extra surface texture without much cost. For texture detail, shockingly, I only saw a 2% difference between low and ultra, and visually, it was hard to spot any meaningful difference. I left this on ultra. For texture filtering, also just a 2% difference in performance from the lowest to highest setting. This sharpens textures viewed at an angle, but for me it was hard to spot any visual difference. I leave this on high just to keep things looking as clean as possible. Grass quality, this one's pretty interesting. From lowest to highest, I saw about an 8% FPS hit. Each setting adds more grass to the landscape, but I wouldn't necessarily say it looks better. For me, lowest gives a cleaner, more readable environment, and I feel like it gives a competitive advantage because there's less visual clutter, so that's what I've been using. For grass draw distance, this determines how far out grass is rendered. It can have up to a 20% impact on performance. Visually, it matters more for immersion than clarity. I'd call this one preference based. I lean toward medium or low for better FPS. For shadow quality, there's about a 4% difference between low to high. Higher settings do make shadows look darker and more defined, but again, I'm not sure it looks better. It does look different, but better, I don't know. I find that keeping this on low actually improves visibility in many situations and is advantageous competitively, so I leave it on low. For distant shadows, this adds shadow detail at longer distances with about a 10% FPS impact. It can make the environment look more complete, but just like with close range shadows, I prefer the increased visibility that comes with this setting on low. For render target format between standard and high, I saw about a 7% FPS difference, but visually I could not tell any difference. If anyone has any idea what this does, please let me know. Environment quality, this setting had the biggest impact of all the settings, up to a 46% FPS drop from low to ultra. From what I could tell, it mainly affects the detail of the sky and clouds, and honestly, I don't need ultra detailed clouds in a tactical shooter, so I keep this on low and save the frames. Alright, that wraps up all the settings. After thoroughly testing everything, these are the settings I'm rolling with for Arma Reforger. Personally, I feel like I'm getting about 90% of the visual quality you'd get at max settings, while only sacrificing around 25% performance compared to the lowest possible settings. To me, that's a solid trade-off. So if you're just looking for a great starting point, I'd recommend trying out my PYUR presets compared to the lowest settings or max performance. After that, I'll run the footage of the side-by-side versus the highest settings or max visuals, so you can really see the difference. And that's all I've got for this one. I hope this breakdown helped you out. If you found it useful, consider dropping a like, subscribing, or even becoming a channel member. It really helps support Pyurology and lets me keep making content like this going forward. Also, I'm now offering one-on-one consultation sessions for Tier 3 members if you need personalized help with your setup. If you've got any questions or comments, drop them in the comments below or hop in the Pyurology Discord and shoot me a message. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.